Have you ever made like a really bad decision at work
Mm,
and you just wanted to blame it on bad luck?
yeah.
What if there was a way to actually like learn from those decisions and make better choices in the future?
That's a great question, and that's kind of what we're going to dig into today. We're going to be talking about how to use Annie Duke's insights from poker to make better decisions in the forced industry.
This is the FBS podcast. Our deep dive today is going to focus on leveling up those work skills. And, in forestry, with markets always changing and the conditions being so unpredictable, good decision-making is super important.
Absolutely. And Forced Business School really understands the challenges that folks in the middle of their careers face. And that's why we're doing this deep dive into thinking in bets. We've got a transcript from one of her Google Talks and some notes from a Forced Business School podcast that we'll be using.
So today we're talking about a world champion poker player
Yeah.
who now helps business leaders make better decisions.
One of the coolest things she talks about is that life is more like poker than chess.
Okay, I'm curious.
Mhm.
So
Well, in chess, you've got all the information. You know exactly what your opponent is going to do and what's going to happen. You can plan every move. Life, and especially forestry, there's a lot more surprises.
you mean like lumber prices going crazy or weird weather or even new regulations popping up?
Yeah, exactly. Just like in poker, we're making decisions all the time without having all the information. There's always luck and stuff we just don't know about.
So are you saying that our decisions at work are basically bets?
That's exactly right. Anytime a sawmill owner buys new equipment or a logger bids on a timber sale, they're making a bet on what's going to happen in the future.
So understanding the odds can help us make smarter bets.
Yeah, and one of the biggest mistakes people make, and she calls this resulting, is that we judge decisions based only on what happened in the end.
So if a logger buys a new harvesting machine and then the price of timber drops, they might think it was a bad decision.
Even though they couldn't have known the price was going to drop, we tend to focus on the result and forget that the decision itself might have been good based on what they knew at the time.
That reminds me of the example she gives about that Seattle Seahawks coach at the Super Bowl.
You mean the one where they threw the ball and lost the game?
Yeah,
Yeah.
everyone thought that was a bad call. But she said that the chances of an interception were actually really low.
Right. It was a bad outcome for sure, but the decision itself wasn't necessarily wrong.
So how can we avoid making that same mistake at work?
The key is to have accurate beliefs about the world. Always questioning what we think, looking for different perspectives, and being open to changing our minds when we get new information.
But that can be tough, right? Especially when things are complicated and everyone has a different opinion.
Definitely. That's why she talks about building a truth-seeking group.
So it's like having a bunch of people with different backgrounds and experiences who can challenge each other and help you see the big picture.
Exactly. It could be foresters, loggers, sawmill owners, even scientists. The idea is to get as many points of view as possible and make it a place where people feel comfortable sharing their opinions, even if they're different from yours.
So it's okay to disagree and ask hard questions.
Yes. And it's also about separating the information itself from where it came from. She calls this universalism.
So even if your competitor tells you about a new logging technique, you should still consider if it's a good technique.
Right. Don't just dismiss it because of who told you about it. Look at the idea itself and see if it makes sense. This helps us get past our biases and closer to the truth.
I can see how that would help you make better decisions in forestry. There's so much to think about.
It's all about taking a strategic approach, like a professional poker player.
Okay, so we've talked about how life is like poker, and we should think of decisions as bets. What else can we learn from poker that will help us at work?
Let's talk about bet sizing. Just like in poker, where you change your bet based on how good your cards are and how much risk you're willing to take. We need to think about how much we're investing in our decisions.
So if a sawmill owner is thinking about a big upgrade, they shouldn't just go all in right away.
Maybe they could start with a small investment or a pilot program to see how it works before spending a lot of money.
So it's about weighing the pros and cons and making calculated bets.
Right. And imagine that same sawmill owner is under a lot of pressure from competitors and trying to meet deadlines. That can lead to what poker players call tilt.
Yeah, that kind of pressure can make you do crazy things.
Yeah.
Poker players call this tilt.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. Isn't that when you let your emotions take over and you start making really dumb decisions?
Exactly. It's that feeling of panic or frustration that can make you mess up big time. And it happens all the time, not just in poker, but in any high-stress job, like forestry.
I can see how that would happen to a logger who's up against a deadline. Or a sawmill owner dealing with broken equipment. How can you avoid tilt?
Well, the first thing is to know what sets you off. What are the things that make you emotional at work? Once you know what those triggers are, you can figure out how to handle them.
So, like if a forester knows that inventory season stresses them out, they could plan for extra breaks or maybe delegate some tasks. Right. And remember, you don't have to make every decision right away.
So it's okay to take a step back and say, I need to think about this.
Exactly. Sometimes the best decision is to not decide anything until you've had time to think it through and talk to someone you trust, maybe a colleague or a mentor who can give you a different perspective.
It's like having someone to bounce ideas off of,
Right.
to make sure you're not letting your emotions get in the way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another great tool from Annie Duke, the pre-mortem.
Pre-mortem.
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't heard of that one. What is it?
It's like a thought experiment. You imagine that your project failed a year from now, and you try to figure out what went wrong.
So you're basically thinking about the worst case scenario.
Right. You get your team together and you say, okay, let's say this project totally bombed. What do you think happened?
That would make you think about all the risks and challenges. You might not have thought about them otherwise.
It helps you find those blind spots and come up with a plan B. And it can also help everyone get on the same page and understand the potential problems.
So you're being proactive instead of reactive. You're trying to fix problems before they even happen.
Right. Now let's see how all of this works in the real world. Let's say a sawmill owner is thinking about buying a new log scanning system.
That's a big decision. Could really change their business.
Absolutely. So the first step thinking in bets is to be really clear about what they're betting on.
So what are the different possibilities? What if the new system makes them more efficient and profitable?
Yeah, but they also need to think about what happens if the technology doesn't work out or the market changes in a way they didn't expect. They have to think about all the possibilities,
Yeah.
not just what they want to happen.
And they need to think about how likely each of those possibilities is.
Right. They need to do their research, look at data from other sawmills, talk to experts, analyze their own production process.
So don't just go with your gut. Do your homework.
Definitely. And this is where a truth-seeking group can really help. They could bring in their production manager, sales team, maybe even a consultant who knows about sawmill technology.
To make sure they're thinking about everything.
Exactly. The goal is to get as complete a picture as possible, knowing that there will always be things they can't know. And then they have to decide how much they're willing to bet on each of those possibilities.
This is the bet sizing we talked about.
Right. How much are they willing to invest knowing that it might not work out?
Maybe they could start with a smaller system and try it out in one part of the mill.
Right. Or maybe they decide to go all in based on how confident they are in their financial situation. The important thing is that it's a conscious decision. They're weighing the potential rewards against the risks.
So they've defined the bet, gathered information, got their team together, and decided how much to invest. What happens next?
Let's say a year goes by and the new system isn't making them as efficient as they thought it would.
If they were just resulting, they might think they made a bad decision and give up on the whole thing.
Exactly. But instead of getting discouraged, they can use Annie Duke's framework to analyze the situation.
So they would go back and look at their assumptions. Did they underestimate how long it would take their employees to learn the new system? Were there technical problems they didn't expect? Did the market change in a way they didn't foresee?
Right. They'd try to figure out if the decision itself was bad or if something happened that they couldn't control. This can help them decide whether to change their approach, invest more, or even cut their losses.
So it's about learning from your experiences, good and bad, and getting better at making decisions.
Exactly. And remember, even the best decisions are still bets. There's always some luck involved.
Okay, so we've talked about how to think about decisions like bets, the importance of doing your research and having a good team, and how to stay calm under pressure.
Yeah, we've covered a lot, but there's one more really important part of Annie Duke's thinking and bets that we need to talk about.
Okay, I'm listening.
What's that? It's the idea of creating a culture of thinking and bets within your whole team or organization.
That sounds interesting, but kind of hard too. How do you actually do that?
Well, it starts with the leaders.
Mm-hmm.
They need to set the example.
So if a logging company wants their team to think in bets, the executives have to do it too.
Exactly. They need to admit when they don't know something. Be okay with being wrong, and encourage everyone to talk openly about risks and problems.
That might be a tough change for some leaders in forestry. You know, there's a lot of, I know everything, and not wanting to look weak.
Yeah, that's true. But Annie Duke says that admitting you don't know everything and being okay with that is really important for learning and growing.
So instead of acting like they have all the answers, a leader should be more like a guide, helping the team explore and figure things out.
Exactly. They should encourage people to ask questions, challenge each other, and look at things from different angles.
And make it a safe space for people to share their opinions, even if they disagree with the boss.
Right. It's about building that truth-seeking group we talked about, creating a place where people are curious and want to learn from each other.
I can see how that kind of culture could lead to better decisions. But what happens when someone makes a mistake? How do you deal with that in a thinking in bets way?
Remember, it's important to separate the decision from the result. Don't blame the person. Use the situation as a learning experience for the whole team.
So let's say a forester makes a decision about thinning that doesn't work out. Instead of getting mad at them, you would sit down with the team and talk it through.
You would ask things like, what information did we have? What did we think was going to happen? Were there things we couldn't control that affected the outcome?
So the goal is to figure out what went wrong, not to find someone to blame.
Right. It's about creating an environment where people feel safe taking risks and making mistakes because they know they won't be punished if they learn from it.
Okay, this all sounds great. But how do you actually make it happen? What can leaders do to build this kind of culture?
Annie Duke suggests including thinking in bets in performance reviews.
So instead of just looking at the numbers, like how much timber was cut or how many acres were planted, you would also look at how people made their decisions.
Right. You would look at how they gathered information, weighed their options, considered the risks, and got feedback from others.
You're rewarding the process, not just the outcome.
Exactly. And you can encourage thinking in bets in everyday conversations, too.
How would that work?
Just notice when people are talking like they're 100% sure about something and challenge them to think about it in terms of probabilities.
So instead of saying, I know lumber prices will go up next quarter, you would say something like, based on what's happening in the market, I think there's a 70% chance that lumber prices will go up.
Exactly. And be ready to explain why you think that. What information are you using?
So you're moving away from gut feelings and using data and analysis to make decisions.
Yes. And it's about being okay with not knowing everything. It's fine to say, I don't know, or I might be wrong. In fact, admitting when you're not sure can help you make better decisions because it forces you to find more information and listen to other people's ideas.
It sounds like building this culture of thinking in bets is an ongoing process.
It is. It's about always challenging yourself, questioning your assumptions, and being open to new ideas.
And creating an environment where learning is the most important thing. Annie Duke thinks this kind of culture can make the forest industry stronger and more successful.
Absolutely.
Well, that's something we can all agree on, I think. So that wraps up our deep dive into Annie Duke's Thinking in Bets. We hope you can use these ideas in your own work and see how they can help you make better decisions.
Remember, like Annie Duke says, decisions are bets on the future, and the future is always uncertain. So make the best bets you can with what you know, and keep learning along the way.
That's great advice. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep those brains working and keep thinking in bets.
Hey, this is Steve Bick with the Forest Business School. Thanks for listening to the FBS podcast, and I hope you will subscribe. The truth is, these deep dives barely scratch the surface of some of the topics we cover in the Forest Business School programs, and the podcast is a way of reaching a wider audience. Check out my website at vtfbs.com for more information. Reach out if you want to talk about one of the FBS programs or have custom training or project needs that you'd like to discuss. Again, thanks for listening to the FBS podcast.